Welcome everyone to Neurology Education in Focus, a series of webinars from the Student Interest Group of the American Academy of Neurology. This series was developed during the recent pandemic in order to provide ongoing resources for students. Judging from the over 600 registrants, today's topic on career paths within neurology is clearly one of great interest and for good reason. The World Health Organization has also identified the increasing global public health importance of common neurological disorders, including dementia, epilepsy, headache disorders, multiple sclerosis, neuroinfections, Parkinson's disease, stroke, and others. Personally, it's been very rewarding to take care of patients with neurologic conditions and to have the opportunity to positively impact their quality of life. So I congratulate all of you for exploring your interest in neurology, and thank you for joining us from not only across the United States, but from across the world. We're pleased to share that over 100 of our registrants tonight are from other countries. So based on the time zone you're in, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. We're very excited to have a wonderful panel of distinguished guests to share some pearls about their own individual career paths, and we look forward to an interactive session. Many thanks in advance to our panelists, who you'll meet shortly, for spending their evening with us today and for their dedication to fostering student interest in neurology. Next slide, please. In regards to some Zoom housekeeping items, please use the Q&A button for questions and reserve the chat function for technical problems such as with sound or video. As Maggie mentioned, the webinar is being recorded. At the end of the event, please complete the brief poll so we can reflect on your feedback. Next slide. I'd be remiss in not recognizing the Sign Leadership Group that came together last spring to identify and develop resources for all of you, including these series of webinars. Dr. Blake Beeler and fourth-year medical student Alvin Singh are our National Sign Ambassadors and former Sign chapter leaders at their respective schools. Dr. Beeler is currently a first-year neurology resident at Rush University Medical Center, and he's on call today, so he'll try to join us as the schedule allows. Alvin is a fourth-year medical student at Rosalind Franklin University, and he recently reached an important milestone in completing his neurology residency interviews. So our very best wishes are with Alvin and with all of you who are awaiting your match results in March. This event would certainly not be possible without the amazing support and organization of our wonderful AAN staff, and I'd like to thank our undergraduate education manager, Maggie Rock, and UME coordinator, Genevieve Gates. Many thanks also to Kyle Rockman for our much appreciated technical support behind the scenes. Next slide. So today's focus is that you'll be learning about our panelists' unique pathways to their careers, and we're going to be discussing various career opportunities within neurology, spanning academics, child neurology, general neurology, private practice, and research. Have I had the opportunity to delve into some of these myself, and it's wonderful to have the opportunities to even transition during certain aspects of your career path. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Alvin, who will be our moderator for this evening's discussion. Alvin.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. Please allow me to introduce the esteemed members of our panel today. Dr. Erica Augustine. She's the inaugural Associate Chief Science Officer and Director of the Clinical Trials Unit at Kennedy Krieger Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. She's highly regarded as a clinician, a scientist, and a leader in her field. Dr. Augustine, please share a little bit about yourself and how you chose your career path. The floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, and I do want to say thank you to the Academy staff and to the Sign Leadership Work Group for the invitation to join you all tonight. I really am excited to see how many people there are interested in pursuing careers in neurology, and I think I can probably speak for all of the panelists when we say that we're excited about that and really delighted to have a conversation about careers today. And we're all a little bit different in what we do and how we came to neurology, so maybe that's a good place for me to start. I imagine some knew when they entered medical school or pretty early on that they were interested in a neurology career, and that path was a little different for me. I certainly was interested in pursuing a career where I would care for children, and I knew that pretty early on. And by the time I got to third year, my approach really was pediatric everything. So if there was a rotation that could be made pediatric, that's what I wanted to do. So it was pediatric psychiatry and pediatric surgery and other pediatric subspecialties. And I was really fortunate to be in a place that had very strong neurology and very strong pediatric neurology. And so when that time came to sort of drill down into my selections for my third year clerkships, I chose to have some time on pediatric neurology as part of that rotation. And without that, I'm not actually sure I would have become a pediatric neurologist, because I really didn't know that that was even a part of neurology. I guess I didn't really think about what conditions might impact children, or even that there were a sufficient volume of conditions that impacted children, that there would be a whole field about it. So it's really in that clerkship that I fell in love with child neurology and found that it had everything I was looking for in medicine in terms of how I wanted to practice and the kind of career I thought I wanted to pursue. I had the chance to have, fairly straightforward and very complex conditions that affected my patients. I could build short and long-term relationships with families. And I had a chance to really cross the spectrum of the settings of practice, from outpatient to inpatient and tertiary or critical care as well. And so all of those things really fit well together. And as you know, as I'm sure you all know, everything affects the brain and the brain affects everything. So I still get to think about every organ system and every specialty, from cardiology to genetics and metabolism and neonatology and everything else. So I thought it was a really exciting field, and I'm really happy that these many years later, I still think that some of the most exciting things in medicine are happening in child neurology. So it was a good pick, good fit for me, and it still is. And it's really proven to be great from that standpoint. Right now, as you mentioned, I am newly an Associate Chief Science Officer at the Kennedy Krieger Institute. It's an affiliate of Johns Hopkins University. And at Kennedy Krieger, we focus on education, care, and research for individuals impacted by neurodevelopmental conditions across the lifespan. So it's a fairly unique institute. And there I work with leadership to develop and shepherd our clinical research program across many different disciplines. And I also lead the clinical trials unit there, and I'd be happy to answer more questions about that. I think I'll stop there to start. Thank you, Alvin.
Thank you, Dr. Augustine. So next we have Dr. Rujata Wilson. She's a child neurologist at UCLA Medical Center, as well as assistant professor at David Geffen School of Medicine at UCLA. She's a clinician scientist and has demonstrated a longstanding commitment to training and education in child neurology. Dr. Wilson, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Alvin. And I'll echo the thank yous that Dr. Augustine has said as well. Thank you to the Academy for having me. Thank you all for joining today. We're tremendously excited about how many of you are interested in pursuing neurology, either child or adult. Fortunately, Dr. Augustine, also being in child neurology, highlighted some of the really wonderful aspects of child neurology. But I'll start by saying what brought me to child neurology is I was in medical school and I knew I was interested in pediatrics. Still hadn't quite defined that because I hadn't done my clinical rotations. And it was the summer after my first year of medical school when I was searching for opportunities for either research or some sort of work that I could do with one of the physicians at the medical school that I was at. And I identified actually a child neurologist, Dr. Maria Acosta at Children's National, doing some work in neurofibromatosis. So locally at my medical school, I applied for a scholarship to do some research with her over the summer. And then nationally, after I received that, I had applied for, because it was in pediatric neurology, what was then called a Swayman Scholarship through the Child Neurology Foundation. And so that was a really neat opportunity for me because it started opening really cool doors and opportunities and experiences at my local institution, but also nationally in engaging with other child neurologists. And in that summer experience, I had an opportunity to start getting my hands wet in research and clinical research. But I think what was really led me in the direction of child neurology was being a part of the multidisciplinary neurofibromatosis clinic. And I think that's really where I got a chance to see how child neurology shines, I guess I could say, or can really make a difference in a child's life and can lead a team like this. It was neurology, genetics, psychology, psychiatry. And it just really amazed me, these long-term relationships that she had with her patients who in some right have this sort of heterogeneous condition in which they can be very affected in some cases and perhaps not as much in others, depending on the mutation or their manifestations. So from a clinical perspective, it really struck me, that relationship. From a research perspective, I was amazed at how dynamic child neurology is and how much we know, but also how much there is to learn and how many studies are ongoing. And for me, that really drew me to the field in the sense that I felt that I would be always learning, as we are in any field in medicine, but it would provide me opportunities to sort of explore new questions and new avenues, new treatments for the patients that I was serving. And essentially by having that experience earlier in medical school, and I highlight this because some of you who are not MS1s, or maybe gone beyond that summer that you have some time, what it allowed me to do was open up sort of other ways to connect with other child neurologists or other fields in pediatrics and start doing some maybe brief clinical shadowing with them or step into their lab and see what they're doing. And it just gave me a sense to get a little bit more exposure over the years. So even if you're beyond that summertime, I think that's, a nice way to sort of connect with others. A little bit about what I do now. I am at UCLA Medical Center, as Alvin noted. I'm an assistant professor. I am on a K-23 Career Development Award. And prior to that, which I'm happy to speak about a little bit later in the session, I was on a Child Neurology Career Development K-12 Award, which is an outstanding experience as well. So I do both research specifically in motor development and phenotyping and neurodevelopmental disorders. And clinically, I practice largely behavioral child neurology, which is in neurogenetic conditions and neurodevelopmental disorders. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. It's great to have such strong child neurology representation in you and Dr. Augustine. So next we have Dr. James Stevens. He's a private practicing neurologist at Allied Physicians. He's made tremendous contributions to research of neurological disease and has served in many national leadership positions and is currently serving as president of the American Academy of Neurology. And Dr. Stevens, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alvin. And I want to give everyone a very warm welcome from the American Academy of Neurology. It's very exciting to know there are so many of you who are interested in neurology and perhaps pursuing a career in neurology. And I have been at the same group practice, private practice, for the past 34 years, ever since I finished my training. And believe it or not, I can remember what it was like going through medical school and trying to make up your mind on what you were going to do after you finished your training, what you would really have a passion for. And that's going to be the key for every one of you, because I can honestly say every morning I wake up and I'm excited to see what's going to happen with my day and love it that much. And it isn't a job. It actually is something that's a calling. And I want to tell you a little bit about how I got there. When I started medical school, obviously we all had to go through neuroanatomy, and boy, that was a challenge. That was tough stuff, trying to put all that together and figure all those pathways out and memorize all those things. But I realized that, and I don't know if any of you have watched a television program. It was in the States, very popular. This is back when I was a young man. It was called Star Trek. And if there's any Trekkies out there, they all said that space was the final frontier. But I could tell you, I thought about neurology and the brain and everything else. Boy, that's the real final frontier. It's such a black box. We don't know so much about it. There's so much we can learn. And that's true across my whole career. I picked neurology because of one of those reasons is that, throughout my lifetime, we're going to make discoveries, we're going to make advancements, we're going to think about things both diagnostically and therapeutically that will keep it fresh. For an old man like me, over 3 decades, it has proven to be the case. Now, how did I get into a private practice or decide to do that? Well, going through my residency training, I didn't know exactly how I wanted to spend my neurologic career. And I think when we're in that environment, well, what we know is the academic environment. Those are where our teachers are, those are where our mentors are. And so during that residency training, I had the opportunity, I think we all do, that you have some elective time. Well, I chose to take 3 months of my elective time doing bench research in neurology because I thought, wow, that'll be kind of curious. That'll be interesting. And it was, but I found through that experience that I needed to be around people. I wouldn't be happy unless I could sit in a room and touch somebody, hear their story, and think about them. And that's what floated my boat. So I knew I needed to do something in clinical neurology. And when I finished my residency at that time, boy, I'd already met the love of my life in medical school. We already had 2 kids. And I kind of thought, well, what am I going to do now? You know, where do I go? And so I talked to my wife, and it was tough because there were a lot of things in academic neurology that I thought were great, meaning that, boy, you could teach, and that you could educate other people. It was wonderful. You could do research. We had journal clubs. You could learn a lot there. You could go to grand rounds and opportunities to give lectures. It was great. But there were some things in the academic environment that just didn't resonate with me, meaning that, boy, it seemed to take a long time to get things going. And there were layers upon layers upon layers, and there were their own politics involved. So I looked for an opportunity in private practice where maybe I could take the best things from the academic world, incorporate it into a private practice setting. And that's what I've been able to do in my practice of 7 neurologists and 5 neurosurgeons, and that I found the right fit culturally, and that I've been able to teach medical students. We have a medical school where I live and been able to teach them. I've been involved in over 150 clinical trials involving neurology, and have been able to do exciting things outside of it with leadership. And here I am, who knew, you know, a private practitioner from Indiana. And so it really worked out well. And I was able to take my family to a community where they could thrive as well. And so, like another maybe movie that some of you have seen, Forrest Gump and the box of chocolates, that's what I feel like I am every day. And when I go into the room, I don't know what I'm going to see, and I don't know which chocolate I'm going to get, but boy, I'm looking forward to it. And so what I encourage each one of you to do is really find your passion, figure out what it is, and every day will be a great day for you. I found mine in private practice. I probably ran over my time, but thank you, Alvin.
Thank you for joining us, Dr. Stevens. And last but not least, we have Dr. Antuvu. She is assistant professor of neurology at Drexel University College of Medicine. She's a specialist in movement disorders and is a tremendous advocate for the field as well as an educator. Dr. Vu, the mic is yours.
So I will say that I am not very long into this career, and I feel that I've been very lucky to stumble into the career balance that I have. So, but I'd like for the students to go back a little bit to the beginning. So I'm one of those neurology lifers. I, applied to medical school with the intention of becoming a neurologist after reading some Oliver Sacks novels in college, because in college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to help people. I knew I wanted to teach. I knew I wanted to work with people. And I said, oh, well, smart kids want to go to medical school. So I took intro bio. I didn't like intro bio. And so I was like, let me become a psych major. So I was a psychology major. And then it wasn't until I started to read these stories about neurological patients that I said, these are the people I'm looking for. These are stories, they're real people, the narrative. And that's really what drew me in. And so, so after that, it's so easy to hear all of these wonderful stories of very accomplished people and feel sort of self-conscious. So I want to share with you a couple of things. I applied for medical school twice. So that is one thing. I got pulled off of a wait list in June. So I just want to share with you a couple of things that I wasn't AOA, but with persistence and work, I knew that whenever I came to my neurology clerkship, when I was doing that neuro exam every single day, it felt like home. It felt like all these people that I was around, this was what I wanted to do every day. And so whenever I kind of found my people, everything just kind of fell into place, honestly. So, so even though, early on, I didn't have all of the successes that I really wanted, it was nice to find a place where I felt like, I was at home and that I wanted to be and I wanted to continue. So, I went on through my residency. I found a fellowship in something that I love, which is movement disorders. I am able to practice pretty much entirely outpatient. The inpatient life is busy and exciting, but I like to sleep at night. And so the outpatient life is really kind of my home for me. And so I'll tell you that I applied for I was looking all over. I wanted to come back to Philadelphia to be with my fiance at the time. And I applied for these jobs and they were wonderful. And I landed this wonderful job at Drexel University College of Medicine. I was able to do a little bit of teaching. There's some opportunities for me to be involved in teaching and then have a practice that was a little bit inpatient, a little bit outpatient, work with residents. I always said, wow, this is great. I'll be in clinic at least, 4.5 days a week. This will be great. And then what happened? I was saddled with a hospital closure. My clinic then closed. And I found myself in want of another job. So even if your first job looks like it's wonderful, you have no idea what life is going to throw at you. So here I was. I had just bought a house. I was pregnant, and I was trying to negotiate a new job, having only been at this job for about a year. So what did I do? So this would be, this what I would say is sort of a bit of a turning point in my career. And I said, well, let me talk to some people and see what they need. What does the Drexel University College of Medicine school need, right? What are, other practices in the area? What are they able to, what do they need? And I knew my assets. I knew my skill set. I knew I could teach. I knew I could see patients. I knew I was good with patients. And so what I did was I was able to negotiate for a position where half of my position is education. I am the neurology pathway advisor, in which I counsel medical students applying into neurology. I teach with the neuroscience course. I run the neurology clerkship. So a large portion of my career now is what is one of my true passions. You've had other people here, their passions are research and clinical care. Part of my passion is education. And I was able to negotiate and get, basically a real dream, real dedicated time to teach. In addition to that, I was also able to negotiate still working with another institution. So my clinical duties are with the Thomas Jefferson University Hospital. And so I actually am able to run a movement disorders clinic with a movement disorders center, working with other colleagues side by side, which is what I also love. And so even though my first job was not what I thought it would be, I was saddled with basically what felt like disaster. With negotiation, with knowing my worth, it was how I came to where I am right now in this career. And I am really thankful for it. So for the students who feel like, how could I ever live up to that? Realize that failure, challenge, it's all part of the dream, and that you can definitely achieve what you want to.
Thank you, Dr. Vu. So with that, we'll have the question and answer session starting now. A brief reminder to our audience, I welcome you to submit any questions that you have into the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. So we'll start off with a few general questions. And many of you touched on this while telling your stories. And I wanted to ask you if you could expand on this question to the right of your screen. What has been the most transformative event in your career? Dr. Augustine, would you mind starting this off?
Sure, I'll be brief so that we can get to more Q&A as they're coming in. For me, it goes back to fellowship. I think if you'd asked me during medical school what I thought my career would be, I think I would have imagined that the majority of my time would be spent seeing patients in practice in a clinical setting, probably outpatient. And when I got to fellowship, I also pursued movement disorders, like Dr. Vu. And, I was asked, well, what do you want to do and what are you interested in? And I remember thinking to myself, isn't the pediatric movement disorders enough? Like, this is very specific. And I said, well, I do have this interest in in clinical trials and in drug development. And mostly I'm interested because I don't know anything about it. I don't know how you get involved. I don't know who designs those studies or how you become part of those teams. And again, right place, right time. There was a fellowship that they had there focused on experimental therapeutics. And this was a time where I'd left for residency and I'd gone back to Rochester to work specifically with a mentor who I'd known in medical school. And I took a chance and I applied for that fellowship, and it completely changed the whole trajectory of my career. And I do things very differently than what I would have imagined at that time. And that fellowship actually was run by another former president of the American Academy of Neurology, Robert Griggs, who has been and continues to be a phenomenal mentor for me. And I think that it really is sort of the first time that I really understood that you don't make one decision, or you don't have to just make one decision that I'm going to do X or I'm going to do Y. One of the wonderful things about neurology and about medicine generally is that it's a platform for continuing to shift and evolve how you want to have your impact on the world. And that sounds like a big thing, but I think all of what we do are different ways of a very common and shared goal to want to help people. And I really think of research as just that next step in wanting to help people. I moved from helping one-on-one when I'm thinking about patients and families to starting to think about how do I work in small ways to build knowledge or to create treatments that impact or help groups of people. It's that same concept. And I know that some of my colleagues who think about policy, they're thinking of that next level. How do I change care and the structures of care for large groups of people? And you can do all of that within neurology where there's so much need, and within medicine even more generally. So the transformation was understanding that I can do lots of things. I can do research, I can see patients, I can teach, and all of that is part of being a doctor. And I didn't realize that necessarily. And it's been really fun to do that within neurology.
Thanks, Dr. Augustine. And Dr. Wilson?
Yeah, so I'll also try to be brief, but I'm going to choose, just because it's so hard, 3 very brief examples, just given the fact that they really highlighted sort of different aspects, and what I'm hopeful for many of you that are on this webinar today might possibly be some of the things that you're thinking about or points that you might be at right now in your career in medicine or career in science. So first, just quickly highlighting that national scholarship that I found, that Swayman Scholarship. And I highlight that because many of you may or may not be familiar with, the AAN also has medical student scholarships at varying stages. And I think that's beneficial purely in the fact that I did happen to be at an institution with a very large pediatric neurology department, but that may not necessarily be the case across the nation or even within adult neurology. And that allowed me to sort of see this larger network and also get a better understanding of what's out there in the, nationally in child neurology, and engage with other people and hear about their dynamic lives and what they do. So I think that was very transformative early on to ultimately choose a career in child neurology and get those other experiences. Then from a leadership and education perspective, which is where I was sort of deciding between, I love medical education, I love teaching, and I also love research, given the fact that I chose to do a fellowship in autism, essentially at the Center of Autism Research and Treatment at UCLA, which is a very well-known institution, an autism center of excellence. And when I was kind of moving between those two, I did as a resident, as a child neurology resident, an American Academy of Neurology emerging sort of resident enhanced leadership program. And so doing that a little later in residency gave me an opportunity again to sort of engage at the national level with a lot of medical educators and start understanding how maybe I could bring those two interests together and start thinking about how I can be both an educator and a clinician scientist. And so it helped me make some moves early on where I still got to engage in medical education, be a part of AAN, be on the medical education committee, but start really carving my path within science. And it was during my fellowship and really in the second half of my fellowship where I'd say the most transformative thing for me recently and within a career perspective was receiving that Child Neurology Career Development Award, that K-12 award. Because essentially what it allowed me to do was to really integrate the time and the support that I needed on the research that I'm interested in, the clinical research, and what I felt was sort of a direct translation to the patients and the population that I was taking care of. And so having that support, having that network of child neurologists was really helpful for me from a career development perspective, as well as the science and the research that I do as well.
Great. And Dr. Stevens?
Sure. I think I want to start out just by telling everybody, with all journeys, don't be afraid to dream it. Don't be afraid to think about it. And that my transformative moment, if I look back, and this is a story, true story, with one of my partners about 24 years ago, and we were at an annual meeting, decided to have lunch together. And we just started talking about things and say, God, where do you want to see yourself, or what would you really like to achieve, in the future? Just going out, just having, lunch talk. And he said, boy, I really love the idea of medical education, et cetera. He said, someday I would like to be dean of the medical school. Said, wow, that's really neat. I hadn't even thought about that as a potential career. And he goes, Jim, what would you like to do? I said, I started working for the AAN. I think it'd be really cool someday if I could be the president, or lead that organization. And we took actually a picture of this little restaurant, where we met and where we were talking. Well, here we are. And 24 years later, my partner now, who was my partner in practice at the time, is dean of the medical school at Indiana. I'm president of the American Academy of Neurology. It's like, who knew? And I guess my point to all of you is that, it wasn't we knew, both of us knew that was going to happen. We didn't, but the point is, you can dream it. And as Dr. Vu said earlier, if you have the determination, if you have the persistence, it can happen. But it won't happen if you don't think about it, if you don't dream about it, if you don't say in your heart what you really think would be something you'd like to do. And so that's my story.
Thank you, Dr. Stevens. And Dr. Vu?
So like Dr. Augustine, I would say that my transformative event, I alluded to a couple of them in talking about my pathway, but one of the transformative events came across to me during fellowship. I looked at one of my co-fellowship directors and he says, what would you like to do with your career? And I said, I think it would be really great if somebody would pay me to teach. And he looked at me, he was like, gosh, that sounds hard. And he does basic science research with primates. He's wonderful, but he just didn't know how to give me advice on a career pathway in which, I would get somebody to pay me to teach, So I think that I started looking for mentors. And what I did was I was able to go to the AAN, and I'm not trying to sell the AAN here, but I can't help it. I went to the AAN and I ran around like a crazed chicken, and I would just talk to people I didn't know. I went to I marked off all of the things that were early career, interest in education. I looked up my old clerkship director and mentor from medical school, and I found him. I went to all of these sessions, and I would just walk up to the panelists afterwards, introduce myself. I want to go into education. How do I do that? And I found mentors, and it was wonderful. And I got roped into working with the AAN on all of these projects and committees, and it's been exciting. And through their mentorship and with working together with them, partnering with them, it has really transformed my career into what it is now, in which that, did I try out research? Yes. Is it my passion? No, I would spend hours sitting around creating a lecture. And I realized that I was spending a lot of my time doing this sort of thing. And I said, gosh, I must really like it if I'm spending a lot of my after hours time putting this together. And that's how you know what your passion is that you realize, oh my gosh, it's 11 o'clock. I'm still working on this because you know that this is part of what you really, when you really want to accomplish something, it's sort of, it kind of takes you over a little bit, and you get in the zone, and before you know it, you're like, gosh, this is really what I'd like to be doing. And so I would say that, finding mentors, even when they weren't at my institution, As wonderful as my institution mentors were, it was inspiring to say, go look and go find them. And it was wonderful to find a group of mentors from literally all over the country to inspire me to seek out the career that I wanted.
Thank you, Dr. Vu. So I'm just going to go ahead and ask a few questions that have been coming through the chat. Dr. Augustine, this one's for you. Could you comment on what a typical workday would look like as Chief Science Officer and running clinical trials?
Well, this is a new role for me. I recently made this transition and I've been in this position for a couple of months now. So there's all the getting acclimated to a new place after a move part of things. And I would say that although there are some nuances of how things are different, I think there are some components that are true across academic settings, meaning that there's a combination of clinical care that I do, along with some component of education. And then for many people, there will be some administrative components as well. So with organizations or centers or groups that you lead, or programs or projects, and a lot of that is common to academia. For me, those elements all relate to research. So when it comes to care, I am starting a multidisciplinary clinic for Batten diseases, a group of lysosomal storage disorders. For my research, I also do research in that set of diseases. And so part of my days are spent working on our ongoing studies. One is a study of clinical outcomes, trying to find optimal outcome measures for clinical trials. Another study that we're working on is more rare disease focused and thinking about what it means to truly have patient partnership or family partnership in research. And in this case, we're really focused on individual research results and sharing those. What does it mean to do that? And then other parts of what I do, again, they sort of continue that theme of clinical research as focus. So now when I'm teaching, most of my teaching relates to clinical research methods or clinical trials. We just launched a new grant writers group for early career faculty who are looking to pursue research careers. So my teaching actually, again, relates to the things that I'm passionate about. There are lots of ways that you can craft that. And then for my administrative role, that's again, research related. So I work with a team to support clinical trials in both space and manpower to conduct those trials, and in working with teams to make it easier for researchers to do the work that they want to do. So we try to offer the services and streamline things in a way that allows people to really focus on the science and less on some of those other parts. That being said, I have a family, and I try to really, in terms of my in-office time, although COVID in office has a whole different meaning now, but let's just in regular circumstances, I try to keep very 9 to 5 kind of in-office hours. So there might be periods of time where I work outside of that. That's going to be after my kids have gone to bed. It's me and my laptop and catching up on other things. But I try to keep it very focused in the office.
Thank you, Dr. Augustine. On that topic of starting a family or keeping a family during training and beyond, this question is for Dr. Vu from Melissa. Can you share a little bit about your experience starting a family during your training?
So it was a bit of an unusual situation in that, so I actually didn't start a family during my training. It was in my first year of being an attending. While, clinical care I was able to do in the outpatient setting, it wasn't an issue until the very end of pregnancy, where it's a little bit more challenging to stay on my feet for long periods of time. At one point I was giving a lecture sort of sitting. So that part was a bit challenging. But luckily with, being in academics, one of the things that I was looking for when I looked for a job was looking at their parental leave policies and actually actively asking about that and being brave enough to sincerely ask about that. On looking at that, I found that their leave policy was quite generous. It was within lines of what I wanted. And so even when I was looking for a job, I looked for places that were in line with what I wanted, to prioritize sort of that facet of my life and prioritize that time with my family. However, with the closure of my clinic, I ended up having a much longer maternity leave than anticipated, and I returned to a fair amount of virtual teaching, and it took me a little bit longer to actually get my clinic started again. And so, now I'm balancing a little bit of clinical care, a little bit of education. But what is nice about having that dedicated time for education is that it is actually a little bit more flexible than having a clinic. And so if I need to bring the baby to a doctor's appointment, can I schedule some of my meetings and teaching sessions around that? I can. And so it has been a wonderful balance for my family to have a little bit of dedicated time in that way. Because, can I, do I have a little less flexibility? I can't exactly cancel, the clerkship orientation if the baby has a fever, but, I can move patients in the clinic. So there's some times in which I have, more flexibility and sometimes less, but overall, I would say that I have a little bit more flexibility, in my career, with balancing, so both, having a childcare, balancing family duties in that sense, and having a career. So he's only 14 months, so we still got a ways to go.
Thanks, Dr. Vu. For the next question, I'll direct this to Dr. Stevens. What is the scope of a general neurologist, and what types of patients does a general neurologist typically see?
Sure. As I said earlier, that's the part I love about my practice. I do general neurology. I'm also board and sleep disorders medicine, which I enjoy as well. But when I come to the office, I'll see the whole scope of patients, which I find is incredibly rewarding and really interesting. And I'll see everything from, okay, someone who has headaches and you have to figure that out, what's going on. Someone who has a neurodegenerative disorder such as Parkinson's disease or some other movement disorder, as Dr. Vu sees a lot of. I'll see some people with demyelinating diseases, MS, some people who have other neuromuscular diseases who come in. What we find, this is again, Gal, I'm terrible. I'm referring to you think all I do is watch TV and movies, but there was a show called House where the doctor had to figure out all the fascinomas as far as no one else could figure out. That's what a neurologist does a lot, that the other specialties or other people kind of defer and say, I have no idea what's going on. Let's send it to the neurologist. They're the smart ones. See if they can figure it out. And so I get a lot of people who they have a whole list of complaints, but trying to sort out, okay, what's really going on? And that's the thing I love about our specialty, because it was mentioned earlier. Our specialty is a lot about listening and about examining and spending time with that person to really get to the bottom of what's going on. And so I love that about being a general neurologist and what we're able to do. And it was mentioned also about the relationships that you form. I'll see people who have neurologic disease that's going to span their entire life that I have to see them for, whether it be, a multiple sclerosis, or whether it be a seizure disorder, or whether it be something else. But you really form those strong relationships, which again gets me up in the morning and makes it incredibly rewarding. So being a general neurologist is challenging because, believe me, I'm fully aware as far as the trend in neurology to specialize or subspecialize, because it can feel overwhelming. How can you possibly try and, know it all about all these different things? And so I understand that, but by the same token, I can say it's been a great journey and I love it. Every day I love it, the scope of things I get to see and do.
Thank you, Dr. Stevens. So next, this question is for Dr. Wilson. What advice do you have for a student that's contemplating between child and adult neurology, and the advice for someone who perhaps might have discovered child neurology late in the game, so late third year?
I could answer it in one way. Child neurology, of course, is, but there's being married to an adult neurologist. I understand being maybe torn between the two. I really think, and this is one of the reasons why the AAN has this webinar and it has some other ones. I really think that sort of decision between the two is kind of immersing yourself in some of the clinical experiences that exist out there. And what I'll say is, I recognize fully the limitations in medical school when you're trying to do clinical rotations or when you're trying to, particularly during COVID and the changes that have happened, although I know that's evolving a lot more now. And I'm not advocating that many of you spend your weekends or spring break doing some of these things, but what I'll tell you is, although I laid out a scenario that the first summer after medical school, I did child neurology. Even though I loved it, I hadn't decided child neurology for sure at that point. I knew I loved pediatrics. I knew I liked pediatric neuroscience, but I hadn't even hit third year of medical school yet. And you sort of feel like that's getting later because that's when you do these rotations. And I did child psychiatry and I thought that was cool. I did maternal fetal medicine and I thought how neat and the relationships that you have. But what I did, because I still had that interest, is I reached out to one of the child neurologists that I had met during that summer that I didn't do work with. And I said, hey, you know what? I have a couple days off during this time where there's a half day where I have some of these classes or, lectures. And in the afternoon, can I come out to your clinic, your outpatient clinic, and just sort of see what you do out there? And then because I didn't have as much exposure to adult neurology, I went and spent a day in the inpatient doing some of the stroke service. And I know that may not be feasible for all. What I'll tell you is I think we're really trying to expand opportunities where you connect with another institution to talk to them a little bit about it. We've been talking about that at the medical education committee level. But I think if you're still deciding between the two, trying to reach out to those in your department or even connecting with the AAN, becoming a member, and I'll mention the Child Neurology Society and reaching out through opportunities and speaking to more people like us is also really helpful. And I think the second part of that was coming to child neurology sort of late in the game, right? I really don't see third year as being late to the game. And I think that's why I wanted to highlight again, I laid out this picture that I did that summer, that research, and you feel like you have to figure it out at the beginning of medical school, but you really don't. You have time all the way through fourth year and maybe even later. Medicine is just so dynamic to decide what you want to do. And I actually see third year as one of the perfect times to start exploring some of the things that you might want to do. So again, kind of going back to those recommendations, I would recommend sort of seeing opportunities at the AAN. I think if you're still deciding between child neurology, I would actually recommend checking out the Child Neurology Society website and some of the opportunities that they have there to engage with others, just to see what some of the sort of experiences, opportunities, things they have for medical students, getting engaged with a mentor mentee. And then, what I'd also say is reaching back out to the AAN because there are, ways in which we can connect you with members who are in child neurology and adult neurology, and then talk to you a little bit more in detail about the differences between the two or any other additional information that you might want.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. For our next question, in our Q&A, Mark says, I'm a third-year student. He's considering neurology versus internal medicine. And I want to open this one up to the floor. So anyone please chime in. I was wondering if any of you were between two fields of medicine and what was the actual reason you chose neurology? If you're an MD student today, would you still choose neurology over IM?
I can start. Or Erica, you want to go? I'll start. In that, internal medicine, there's a lot that we incorporate into our practice that deals with issues that may classically be thought of as internal medicine. And that in our training, you are required to have that year of internal medicine, at least, in the beginning, or if you're doing pediatric neurology, it'd be pediatrics, general pediatrics, because it's critical to what we do. I think my decision was just the fascination, as I said earlier, with the nervous system and thinking that across a lifetime career, it would evolve to the point that it would always be interesting. For me, I saw a lot of the internists dealing with very similar issues, because I went and explored it and looked at clinical things, but it seemed like a lot of it was diabetes, congestive heart failure, hypertension management, et cetera. And it didn't seem as dynamic as a field as neurology. And I would think, even though, hey, across medicine, we've made advances, in my mind, personally, I still think the axiom holds true, meaning there's so much more that we're going to be learning, going to be able to do in neurology. And we've seen things that was mentioned with stroke. My goodness, when I started my training, it was a very nihilistic approach. We had to support them, et cetera. Well, in my lifetime, I've seen us, and I've seen it, that we gave a medicine, someone goes from being paralyzed, can't talk, all of a sudden, boom, they're ready to walk off the cart and go. And that, let's say in pediatric neurology, we have a fatal disease, SMA, okay, spinal muscular atrophy. It was a death sentence. Now we've got a treatment that can be a cure, and that we're just on the cusp of many, many things that I think just managing. No, they're going to be cures for these things. So I think that's incredibly exciting. So my advice to you, Mark, I think it would be an incredibly exciting career if you decide to pursue neurology, because again, and this is an old statement, neurology, they used to go, oh, why do you want to do that? That's the diagnose and adios specialty. What can you guys do? It's different. It's different. And it's dynamic. It's exciting. And I could give many more examples, but we've got other questions and other people who want to chime in. But that's my teaching.
I'll just add one thing. I agree completely that I think some of the most exciting advances in all of medicine are happening in neurology. But we recognize that not all of you will decide to become neurologists. And just some general advice in thinking about your field is that not every day or even every year is going to have leaps and bounds of excitement. And you need to really like and be able to embrace some of the day-to-day as well. And so sometimes the excitement about a field is not only about the potential of that field and what's happening in terms of breakthroughs, but also in the office, what you might call the bread and butter. What are the very common conditions for that specialty? What are the conditions affecting people that you will see every single day, frequently and often? And do you like those? Do you like spending time thinking about those conditions? And if you don't, then that everyday piece, that might not be the field for you if you don't like the everyday bread and butter of what's day to day.
All right, thank you, Dr. Augustine and Dr. Stevens. So the next question that came up in the chat, how do you cope with conditions where you don't have much control over the course of the disease in neurology?
So I can certainly field that one as the adult movement disorders person. So my bread and butter is a lot of Parkinson's disease. And so while I can help them with some of their symptoms, at this point in time, our research isn't there to really, sort of change the progression of the disease. And even in some of the atypical Parkinsonisms, your, progressive supranuclear palsy and so on, there's not much I can do aside from try to alleviate some of the symptoms that they might experience, help them with, they have a little excessive drooling, maybe help with that, help with constipation. And there is something to be said for partnering with a patient on this journey of what they're experiencing and just being there and just being able to listen, to give counsel to, you've seen this before, and to validate their experiences and for them to have a go-to with, mom is really seeing these hallucinations out in the yard. She's talking to them like, I don't know what's going on, and being able to provide some medical context for that. And whenever possible, able to provide some treatment that provides them some relief that improves their quality of life, even a small amount. And so just being there, guiding them through these conversations, these long-term relationships I have with patients, it is something that brings a lot of value. And so while some might say that, dealing with Parkinson's day to day might be depressing, in some ways, I think that, when I see the difference between the person who walked into my office, or the family that walks into my office and the family that leaves, sometimes it's just a little bit of a sigh of relief, like, something has been addressed. There's a name for this, that I have somebody I can go to. And so I think, there's a reward in that. And there's a reward in partnering with patients above and beyond just providing cures to things.
I'll comment on that quickly as well. We might see this a lot in child neurology, but I do a lot of autism and neurodevelopment. And as many of us know, there is not a cure for autism, but I'll kind of say two aspects of that. Within child neurology, you develop a relationship with the child and with the family. And I think as Dr. Wu sort of highlighted there, even though I may not be able to provide a cure, which is maybe not even something actually they necessarily want, or I might be able to provide, an ultimate treatment to treat these symptoms, what I can is arm them with knowledge and information of what does exist so that they can be supported. They can feel empowered by that knowledge. They can feel less scared of what the trajectory might or might not hold. And then I can be with them every day if needed, right? Every month, every 3 months, every time, to walk them along that journey. And in child neurology, I just had clinic this morning, and I started seeing this patient at 6 months of age when I was a resident. And now she's 7 years old. She has a genetic condition. She has a neurodevelopmental disorder. We didn't know what she would be able to do. I didn't know what she would be able to do at 6 months when she was referred to me, because on fetal MRI, they saw a small cerebellum. That was all the info we had at 6 months. And over the course, with advances in genetic testing and our ability to sort of do other, therapies and intervention and behavioral treatments and clinical trials, I have seen just these tremendous gains and this incredible progression of the field, even from a research perspective. And it was really cool to sit down with the parents today in person, not virtual, and say, wow, how far has she come? And what's next? We don't totally know, but guess what? I do know what you need to do at your school IEP. I do know what you need to tell your occupational therapist. And I do know what we need to be thinking about in terms of risk for seizure or not. And just that information for the family today, even if ultimately we didn't know all the answers, was so alleviating. And what it makes you realize is that, they're going through this every day, 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And you can take that 1 hour that you go through it with them and hopefully make each one of those hours that they're going through a little bit better. And that long-term relationship and the ability to do that and now see the changes in pediatric neurosciences and neurology in general is really, really cool.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. So I think we have time for just one more question. This one came in through the RSVP. We as physicians have a unique knowledge and social station to perhaps advocate and drive health policy forward and educate the next generation. What opportunities are there to advocate for your patients through community or policy work? Perhaps Dr. Stevens, would you mind taking this one?
The AAN is the only organization in our country that does direct advocacy for general neurologic issues. And we're there on the Hill, and that we're working, and that we have a network on the helps our members on the local, state, regional, and national levels to try and address those issues. And there are many, but let's talk about one that really we're focusing on, and that's healthcare disparities. And there's a problem in our country right now where not everybody gets the care that they should get. And we need to work with our system, with the legislature, with the regulators, all of these, to really work hard, roll up our sleeves to get answers to this. Because it's not right in a country that has our resources for seeing a big disparity in how people can access care. And so that's in the wheelhouse of our organization. We're very much interested in those public health issues. We definitely have relationships and contacts. We have our people in Washington, D.C., but also with each state neurological society. to try and help address these issues. And so we're a big proponent for that.
Thank you so much, Dr. Stevens. So with that, we are closing in on time. We will try to get the answers to the questions that we weren't able to get to in the Q&A and post those on the AAN website as well, like we did with our previous webinars. And I just want to take the time to thank everyone for joining us, especially our esteemed panelists. It's been so informative to get your advice. And as well as the AAN staff, Kyle, Maggie, and Jen, for propping this up and making anything and everything happen. And also our audience, thank you for joining us this evening. Remember to stick around, please, for a few minutes just to complete the short 2-question survey regarding the event, and so we can improve going forward. This program is also being recorded. So and with that, I'll hand it over to Dr. Soni for some final words.
Well, thank you, everyone. I think you've had a good example of seeing that neurology has something for everyone. I think you can see the diversity in the backgrounds, the diversity in the pathways, the journeys. Neurology can be, actually, we can be the primary care physicians for our patients who really only have neurologic disorders. So that's another differentiating factor sometimes in thinking about, specialties versus, even primary care. We really have longitudinal relationships with our patients. There are procedures that can be done, and I can go on, but we are short on time. I encourage all of you to think about becoming AAN members and being able to engage further with your peers in the medical student synapse. It's a wonderful platform for you to network and have some other questions answered, as well as the resources that have been provided to you already. So thank you again, and we hope to see you on a future SIGN webinar.